Okay, great. Good morning and welcome to this session of Cosmology of Light. And this is a continuing series on musings. And today we're basically going to have an open dialogue around a unified theory. And here, of course, I've used the cosmology of light as a basis for a unified theory. But what do I mean by a unified theory? So I'm going to pull up this post that I had recommended reading. And just as a reality check, you see the three expressions of
Yes.
unified theory. Okay, great, awesome. So I'm going to just summarize this very briefly to kind of set the stage. Is that in this unified theory, the basis of it is considering the way that light moves. And the big question is, why does light travel at the finite speed we know it travels at in vacuum of 186,000 miles per second, or c? And in this point of view of light, or in the cosmology of light that's erected here, the speed of light at c is a very significant intentionality. And there's a reason why it travels at c. And how I've arrived at this cosmology of light is by extrapolating and then asking, what would reality look like if light were to travel infinitely fast? What would reality look like if light were to project itself at zero speed?
Right.
What would reality look like if light were to travel somewhere between a known speed of c and infinite? And in kind of imagining those worlds through various thought experiments, I erected this framework of a cosmology of light. But the really interesting thing is that the model that was created as a result, from a perspective of a model, it provides a rationality as to how materialization occurs and this immense diversity that we experience from the smallest levels. So, whether we're talking about quantum particles to the largest cosmic parameters of space-time, energy, gravity that define the container within which we exist, and everything in between can, in a sense, be rationalized if we consider these simultaneous layers of light that in a cosmology of light are imagined to exist all at the same time and impact this layer of light of c within which we exist. So that's the framing. And today we're going to go a little bit, perhaps I'll see how the discussion goes and what you want to in particular focus on. But the idea is to get to this thread of a unified theory that connects the smallest to the largest, and including things like behavioral constructs that arise when materialization occurs. So looking at all the subsequent layers of emergence from the less complex to the much more complex, and trying to see whether it makes sense when you consider light as the basis. So that's the background. And before we go any further, let me pause, and I'm going to just ask for a brief round of introductions. So, Margaret, maybe you can start.
My name's Margaret Faines, and I'm a graphic designer, but I'm also someone who's taught meditation. And so I kind of have a background as a therapist. I'm a little bit broad in my career expression, but it helps me sort of bridge gaps between different categories of learning. And in my teaching, I've always tried to focus on perceptual training instead of linear or analytical only. And that sort of has a match, which is why I'm interested in Praveer's work, because there's a big aspect of imagining. And that's, it's so helpful, no matter where you are in your particular learning curve or focus of learning. You also, Pravir, used the word thought experiments.
Mhm.
So even though I'm not on the science side, I'm very excited by the concepts of the cosmos. And so that's where I have this connection. And then being able to express that visually is challenging, but very, very full of meaning.
Mhm. Thank you, Margaret. Natty, would you like to?
I'm the victim.
Well, you have to be. Your turn was coming, right? You knew that.
Yeah, I know.
Never heard someone introduce themselves that way.
Yeah, I don't like to talk about myself at all, but I'll do it. So my name is Nati Gur. I am a management consultant with focus on complex system or complex adaptive system, or utilizing or understanding better complexity to resolve business problems. I also consider myself as a student of Zen, and I love to take pictures, so I'm a photographer as well.
Oh,
And all of those are touching light in any way, shape, or form. So I'm excited about this topic, and let's see where it goes.
Great, thank you, and you know, for me, this would be a very meaningful session, because it's you know, it's always interesting to see who shows up for the sessions, and you know, here are two people that I've worked, you know, very closely with, I would say, for a while in different ways. So, and it's been, so with Natty, it's been with the complex systems. We've done a lot of work together in the last year and a half. And he's, by the way, Natty's a very gifted photographer. He's too humble when he just says, you know, and then Margaret and I have been working on the light for the last 7 months. So there's been a lot of rich interaction as a result of that. So anyway, let me, you know, with that, kind of go back to that post that I had shared, and we can begin to go through that more systematically.
Mhm.
But the first question I'll ask is, if you read it, then what, if there's any thoughts, any comments, and then we can go through it systematically and
Okay.
and just kind of dissect it and go into a little more detail with respect to some aspects of that. So
I vote for let's go through it, and if there was something
that's
that was
fine.
on my
All right,
mind,
okay.
I can share it in that particular.
Sure. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so you know, I call this post, which was a recommended reading for this session, is Three Expressions of a Unified Theory. And the background of these three expressions, one, I briefly went over the idea of the cosmology of light and how I arrived at that framework, which has been was first expressed through a series of 10 books. But it's just started off with a very simple question, you know, why does light travel at speed c? And so chronologically, the first expression was through these series of books that I used math as an artistic medium to try and express what I perceived as the power and light. And you know, so if there is, I always say that if there is a pure mathematician or a pure scientist, they would be aghast, you know, by some of the leaps that I've made or the way that I've used math. But it's been artistic, and for me, you know, because there's something that has been codified or has been academic, or there's set ways of how you may use certain things, it by no means suggests that that's the end of how it should be used. And so whether it's mathematics or whether it's science or whether there's multidisciplinarity that's called for, because you kind of hit into walls of different kinds if you just try and use only one discipline to try and express something that's much larger than a discipline. So that's the kind of stuff that I was trying to break, or naturally that just evolved. And so over the course of several years, I ended up writing the 10 books, which was the first expression of this unified theory. But then as I stepped back, as I finished it, the second expression is more where I began this series of trying to take out nuggets from the 10 books and essentially summarize that as 50 nuggets, if you will, or thought pieces that went into this idea of musings on light. And that is, by the way, what Margaret and I are now collaborating on with a book Margaret is illustrating. So that's kind of the second expression. And then the third expression is where what I've done is to try and dialogue with a more academic audience is taken, and this is ongoing, take key ideas from the books, and then I put it in technical terms and just go through a process of essentially getting it peer reviewed, getting it accepted for publication in conferences or in journals. And so there's been a number of peer reviewed technical publications that have emerged from this body of cosmology of light. And it started, I think, so here, the first one was, it's been a fairly tight time frame. So the first one was accepted in 2019, beginning of 2019, and it's been ongoing for 3 years. And so the most recent ones are 2021. There's been a few that have been accepted this year. And most recently, I also did a piece on Euler's identity, which is another kind of take on interpretation of that, what's considered to be the most beautiful equation in the world, but from the point of view of light. So that's been the three expressions of light. And we can go wherever I can speak more about it, or we can go into any specific aspects. So the place that I like to start is this musings, because they're expressed in a completely non-mathematical way, and just trying to get to intuitive nuggets of what the cosmology of light is. And so if that's a place we can certainly start, but let me pause there. So
can I ask two general questions?
Yeah, please.
When you say light, you mean photons?
No. So I think photons is an expression of light. Mm-hmm. But when I say light, I'm talking about something that's a creative medium in which the universe expresses itself. So it's something that is if we think about it from the point of view of a canvas on which something is created, that canvas we can think about as being constructed by light in a certain way, but it's a different nature of light. So the way that I perceive light is it's multidimensional, and light projects itself certainly in the way that we understand it scientifically as well, which is as photons, as the electromagnetic spectrum, as something traveling at 186,000 miles per second that can express itself either as wave or particle. When it expresses itself as particle, then we know it in its photon kind of face, but the photon itself has a lot more depth to it, the way that I see it. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but.
So everything that has frequency is light, like also sound?
So light is, the way we understand it scientifically is that it's called the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's this perpendicular interaction between, in a sense, electrical waves and magnetic waves that propagate at a speed of 186,000 miles per second. And frequencies can exist from, there's a vast range of frequencies that all can travel at the same speed of 186,000 miles per second. And the flip side is that obviously as the frequency gets faster, then the wavelength, which is the other thing to consider, gets much shorter. And as frequency gets slower, then wavelength gets much bigger. So, the way that we understand light is that it has a certain range of, it's something that's propagating through electric and magnetic perpendicular vibrations, but it's traveling at a fixed speed of 186,000 miles per second, and it has a range of different frequencies. Now, there's a way to think about sound if you step back into the larger kind of cosmology of light that you can arrive at when you think of speed traveling at light traveling at different speeds, then you can think about sound differently as well. Because if I go back to a hypothetical situation or a thought experiment of light traveling infinitely fast, and then light projecting itself at slower speed, then I could make the case that when light projects itself at a slower speed, there's a initial vibration that takes place, and one way in which we understand that vibration is as some kind of primal sound. And so in that respect, yes, there's a relationship between sound and light. So sound becomes something that emerges from the way light projects itself. But when we think about sound in our physical universe, we're thinking about it differently. It travels at a much slower speed. It's something that's created due to a physical phenomena of compression. So we think about it differently. So it's got a different scientific basis just when we look at it physically. Even though in a cosmology of light, I would say there's a deep connection between sound and light that transcends any of our thoughts that just have to do with a scientific understanding of sound and light.
Yeah, thanks. I asked because in Zen, all the sensors are considered to be the same, yeah? So frequency. So that's the reason why I asked, to see if it's more or less the same concept or not.
Yeah. So I think in its origins, it comes from one thing, but then the expression of it becomes different. So I can see from the Zen perspective why that would make sense.
Thanks.
Sure.
And like the tricky other one.
Yeah.
Just so, is black considered to be light?
So again, this is
in your perspective.
Yeah. So I can answer this in a couple of different ways. So one is that if suppose I were to go back to in the cosmology of light, what I consider to be the native state of light is light traveling infinitely fast. Okay, so when it travels infinitely fast, then we may think of some fundamental properties that emerge in that context. So if you take any volume and you have a light source at the center, and light travels infinitely fast, it's going to be present everywhere at the same time. So there's some kind of omnipresence. Then, since everything that happens in that volume or space can be recorded in the fabric of light, so light has a complete knowledge of everything that appears or disappears. So there's some kind of omniscience that also we can relate with that light. If anything not of the nature of light arises, then it'll be overpowered by light. So we can think of an omnipotence that light has. And then since everything is connected in the fabric of light, there's a fundamental harmony or a nurturance that exists. So we can think of omniharmony. Now, the question of black or darkness. Now, if we consider light to project itself at zero speed, then, and if we ask what kind of reality would that create, right? So it's going to be the opposite of what we imagine when light travels infinitely fast. So instead of all knowledge, it's going to be a complete absence of knowledge. Light essentially will not be able to travel anywhere if it exists at zero speed, and therefore it will never be able to express the reality of what it is. So it'll be covered over, and that covering over and that submergence of everything that's in light can appear as an original darkness or blackness. But still, it's light that's created it. It's light that exists in a certain way where it can't travel, where it's stuck in itself so that it can't express itself. And that, to me, is the equivalent of kind of what appears to be black or dark. So from that point of view, I would say that yes, it's also that absence of being able of light being able to express itself is what darkness or blackness is. But it's still light.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But those are great questions. Yeah.
Thanks. Like, I asked the second one because it's also so you can be a layman, you can be a Buddha, you can be above Buddha. The two others that are not Buddha consider not Buddha. So, like, you're not Buddha if you're a layman, you're not Buddha if you are far and above Buddha. So I thought I want to see if the same applied to your theory. So there's light, but when there's no movement, it's no light, and where it's like infinite movement, it's no light, but it's not the same. You see it differently, true?
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. So what was the? Can you say a little bit about Buddha and no Buddha?
Yeah. So you can be, if you are a layman, you didn't have any alignment.
Yeah.
So you're not a Buddha. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're saying you can be above a Buddha, far beyond above Buddha. And when they ask like, or like or the sense like what it means, they say it's not Buddha. Because like a Buddha has certain kind of boundary. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And if you are far above a Buddha, it's fine, but you're not a Buddha.
It's interesting, yeah.
Which is interesting, yeah. But everything there is contradictory. So, I just want to see if I'll ask those two questions because I want to see if there is any alignment, like if there are any roots without even that are coming from Eastern philosophy into.
Yeah.
That's the reason why.
What else?
So I was just going to say that when you discuss fourfoldness, it brings in a vastness for me. It's like it's starting from a very expanded idea, and yet that's a central part of this, right? So you're not starting from the minute, right? You're starting from these light as these very powerful aspects. And so would you say that's an element of the unified theory, the fourfoldness?
Yes, absolutely. I think so, because I think that, as you say, these kind of ways in which light, we're imagining light to exist when we run that thought experiment, and we're coming up with these large kind of ideas of omnipotence, omniscience, omniharmony, omnipresence. I mean, it's difficult to really imagine what those might be, and we're just imagining within the context of that thought experiment. But then, in the reason why it's the basis of the unified theory is because if we then begin to take light, that original light in this point of view, and begin to project it at slower and slower speeds, when we run thought experiments, we can see that it shows up in a similar way, so it's a reflection of itself. And we can, the other thought experiment that I like to mention is which we've talked about, I think in the last session I I'd mentioned this, if you take light traveling at 186,000 miles per second, that implies that it's going to take 8.5 minutes when it travels from the sun to the earth because of the distance. And so if you imagine yourself to be on that ray of light halfway between the sun and the earth, then if you look back at the sun, you realize that 4 minutes in the past, you were at the sun. 4 minutes in the future, you're going to be at the earth. And in the present, you're halfway between. And so the whole concept of this fundamental idea of time, of past, present, future, which are three of the four aspects, emerge just from the way that we consider light to be traveling. You know, if light's traveling infinitely fast, there's no past, present, future. Everything's happening in the now. But because of the way light's traveling in this point of view, then there's fundamental aspects of our experience of reality that emerge as a result of the way light's traveling. And the fourth aspect is that idea of, because light's traveling at a finite speed, then it's going to take a finite amount of, whether it's time or distance, to express whatever is you know, let's assume there's something that light's expressing. It's going to take a finite amount of time to express itself. And that finiteness is the basis of quanta, of packets. That is the basis of matter. So I can make the point of view that the four fundamental things that we take as a basis of our reality, the past, present, future, and matter, emerge again from how light's traveling. But if I push it even further, then these four things are intimately related to the four that we had said exist when light travels infinitely fast. Right. So there's a one-to-one mapping. So there's, in mathematical terms, there's a symmetry that exists. You know, so we're looking at the same thing in a different way, and we imagine that we're seeing something different. It's the same thing, but it's just from the way we're looking at it that it appears different. You know, so the nature of light remains one no matter what. It's just that when it's traveling at a different speed, then we're experiencing it differently, so that a different face of it shows up. And that's the basis of this unified theory, because we can then look at very concretely, you know, for instance, when quantum particles emerge, you know, we already know scientifically that they emerge as four categories, or when atoms emerge, you know, there's four classification, there's four kind of categorizations of the periodic table, or when molecular plans and cells emerge, there's four molecular plans. But in a cosmology of light, we can trace all that back to this fundamental fourfoldness. Even when human beings emerge, there's four ways in which they express themselves. So whether it's thought, emotion, sensation, or will or urge, you know, these are four fundamentally different ways in which human beings exist. And so again, you know, we can tie each of those back to this fourness that exists implicitly in light. And so from that point of view, it's proposed to be a basis for a unified theory in which it's always the same nature of light, but it just shows itself in different ways depending on how we're looking at it. So
I was thinking of a ability to print or render information. And I was thinking just in a very simple frame of like high resolution and low resolution, and how the picture has the same framework. But I was at a conference and they were showing the first pictures of Earth, I think, from the space, and based on the advancement. And it was extraordinary, the difference of how what you could see in this space of time. And it sort of that's how I'm sort of grasping what you're saying, Pravir, that it's how the face of it is shown, even though behind it, there's a similar, the essence of it remains sort of.
Yeah, yeah. So what's the what was kind of the aha or when you looked at those pictures of Earth, what was the thing that emerged?
Well, for example, I'm trying to think the first images were barely recognizable. They were blurry. They were, you know, like a watercolor impression or even less.
I see.
And then so it was the precision that as the technology advanced, but it was so interesting because obviously it was the same image, right? It was the same subject, and yet how you interpreted that, how you felt about it, you know what I mean? It had it changed more than just your visual understanding. Is what I'm. It touched more deeply, and this is, but then this is, you know, it was like this continual. And if you put them up like this, you'd be like, it had more meaning to it as it evolved into more precise form, and yet you could honor this more archaic thing. It was a reflection of, yeah, they were all reflections, but they were different, and they had different essence, kind of different reflective.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Thank you. Yeah, it's also interesting that you know, Natty and I went on a hike in Texas, and he took some photographs with his very advanced camera. You know, perhaps you can speak more about it, but I was amazed at the amount of information that actually was captured by that camera. You can't, I mean, it's impossible to see to the degree of precision that camera could see, in a sense, you know, with the physical eyes. I mean, you know, you see something and it just appears as kind of a leaf or as a surface.
Right.
But then with this camera, the amount of detail, there were like fractal layers of just kind of complexity that it kept revealing, in a sense, you know, behind the surface, which you know, which perhaps is something similar, you know. So
yes.
Anyway, so that's something that came through when you were speaking. So
yes.
So let me go back to this, and you know, we can take it you know, wherever you want, but basically, you know, if we look through this expression, which is the cosmology of light, Musings expression, then you know, we start with this idea of space-time, energy, gravity, which is an expression of that same fourfoldness, and then the electromagnetic spectrum, which I actually model it as having four aspects and not just the electro and magnetic. The electro, of course, corresponds to the power aspect, the magnetic to the harmony aspect, but then there's also the knowledge and the presence aspects that we say exist in light, that have to also, in my perception, show up even in this thing that we call the electromagnetic spectrum, even though we don't call it or recognize it, but you can make the case that these other two aspects are very much a fundamental part of it. And then you go on to the whole you know, idea of bosons, which are the particles that connect all quantum particles together. And you can see there's four kinds of bosons: the gluon, W and Z boson, photon, and then a hypothetical graviton. But again, it's a division of four. And then when you look at quantum particles, you're looking at quarks, leptons, bosons, and the Higgs boson. And then you go on to the atom, and you're looking at S shell, P shell, D shell, and F shell atoms. And so there's this fourfoldness that just continues to express itself. and even up to this idea of culture, or the way that the world develops, with, for example, Israel being completely different in its emphasis than a Japan or an India, and the people that you meet from different countries having something fundamentally different about them innately, which is kind of, in a sense, noticeable. There's a uniqueness that just, one can argue is based on the unique history and geography that different peoples in the world are subject to. But when you look at it big picture, you can see how it's, again, there can be a division of this fourfoldness in the way that different parts of the world have evolved independently, and yet it makes sense as a unified kind of approach. And then in this unified theory, the Big Bang, which is a threshold or a key event, is nothing other than light slowing down to, or projecting itself at speed c. Because what we're saying is that when it projects itself at speed c, that's when this fundamental idea of quanta comes into being, and quanta is nothing other than the basis of all matter. And the Big Bang is where you first have this first expression of matter expressing itself in a profound kind of way. So you can make the case that the slowing down of light to C is what precipitates the Big Bang. And that's accompanied by what we call space-time energy gravity, because that sets up the macro container within which our experience as a cosmos or as a universe exists. And yet the space-time energy gravity is not only something that exists at a macro level, but I would make the case, and I've made the case in the book, The Origins and Possibilities of Genetics, that it's also the fundamental script that is at the basis of all genetics and DNAs. It's space-time energy gravity. It's a fourfold script. Now, of course, coincidentally, when you look at DNA, there's four bases to it, ACTG, but and I haven't probed deeply enough to kind of look at that specific connection of ACTG and how it might relate to space-time energy gravity. But again, the proposition here is that all genetics, all kind of genetic code is written in space-time energy gravity script that's fundamental to not only the way the macro container shows up, but how anything changes at the micro level. It requires a space-time energy gravity quantization or coordination in order for law to become a different law. So no matter if you're looking at how an insect behaves or how a cell is going to mutate, it requires space-time energy gravity to shift at the micro level in order for something different to emerge. And so, but then when we step back and ask, what space-time energy gravity is, it's nothing other than this fourfoldness that we see in light expressing itself in a certain way for a certain purpose, so that the cosmos can experience itself the way that it does. And so that's kind of like the unified sense of how, from the Big Bang, space-time energy gravity is fundamental to every other layer of experience that that naturally emerges or materializes. And if I go into just briefly, and please stop me at any time, but if I break up these, as I said, the first expression was an artistic expression of using mathematics to create these 10 books, or to write these 10 books. But if you look at how these 10 books are structured, then you've got a story of light, which is a summary of all the concepts in a cosmology of light, but in a non-mathematical way. And then you've got the second book, which is called Oceans of Innovation, primarily because it defines, from a systems perspective, mathematically what animates any living system. And the systems perspective here uses math as a language. So you're looking at the fundamental math that would animate any system, and so it's called Oceans of Innovation. And then the third book essentially takes this one key equation that emerges from this oceans of innovation. So it's a key mathematical equation, and it's proposing that this equation, when it iterates, it basically starts off with the Big Bang, and then it every time it iterates, the next level of immersion pops up. And today we're at some kind of where we're trying to get to sustainable global civilization. But that's also an outcome of this same equation iterating and iterating and iterating. And so then you've got this concept of quantum certainty. You know, of course, these are plays on existing concepts, because the way we understand the quantum world is that it's known to be, or scientifically we think there's quantum uncertainty. You know, there's nothing is ever certain, because it's all probabilistic and statistical and things happen randomly. And what I'm saying is that, in fact, no, it's completely certain, you know, because, but you have to kind of see how this fourfoldness is emerging. And so this was a play on this uncertainty. And so in this book, I really explored the notion of quantum certainty that creates sustainable natural and human history, again, through the iterations of this equation. And then the fifth book, which is Supermatter, really asks that, okay, if you continue with this iteration, how would matter change? And so you end up with this idea of supermatter, which essentially you can think of is a complete merging of light in its fullness and matter that's, as we understand it right now. So it becomes a different kind of matter, which is infused with potentiality and possibility that exists in light. And then the cosmology of light kind of summarizes the math that these other books have suggested. But again, you know, as I say, any mathematician would be aghast at the way I've used math. But you know, that's the whole point. You know, is, you know, let's try and just challenge whatever boundaries exist. And then the next four books, you know, real quick, are again a play on, you know, the Emperor's Quantum Computers is just a play on this, the Emperor's New Clothes, because, you know, we've erected or we've suggested that quantum computation works in a certain way, and everybody seems to have bought into it. But what I'm suggesting is that no, in fact, if you think about the way light emerges and this fourfoldness, you can see that quantum computation can be something entirely different. And so, you know, that's what this book is exploring. And then, as I suggested, you know, as a result of constant quantum computation, there's always an output of genetic type code. And it's written in a space-time energy gravity script. And so that's what I explore in this Origin and Possibilities of Genetics. And then the question is, you know, how would fields that we've paid a lot of attention to, or that today a lot of attention is being paid to, like artificial intelligence, how would that be different if you consider that quantum computation and genetics is something different? And so that's what I explore in Second Singularity. And then another area of great interest to us right now is transhumanism. You know, how do we transcend human limits through technology? And here I'm suggesting that if you consider a light and all its potentiality, then how might that kind of model of light be used to transcend limits of how we operate within our kind of human receptacle at the moment. So so that's kind of like the summary of this. But let me just, you know, I don't know if there's anything that, you know, that pops up for you, but I want to just pause there. So.
Yeah, you know, that's kind of contradict to my way of thinking. So I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how does it contradict? Let's be curious. Yeah.
So first and foremost, you're breaking stuff into four. You make an assumption that there is past, future. I disagree.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. For me, if I'm talking in the terms that you coined,
Yeah.
life is infinite.
Yeah.
There's nothing else.
Yeah.
So
But
it's all here and now. Yeah. So whatever you build on top of that is like amazing, and it's like really so true. I know it's the first time that I listened to from like I can understand it from start to end. I disagree with that though. So, but it's like amazing. It's really like it's like it's amazing in terms of it's like Agatha Christie wrote a book. Yeah. So like how do you thought about all the elements and how you connect them together? That's not simple to be done. So yeah.
But
I feel honored working with you more.
no.
But it's still like everyone has his own conception, and
Thank you for sharing that. Of course, I don't see a contradiction though, even though you say there's a contradiction. But because ultimately, yes, you're right. Life is infinite. There's kind of a wholeness to it, but depending on how you perceive it, there's things break up into different parts, and then you practically have to. That's all that this is just showing is like how these different parts connect to something that's mysterious, infinite, and so on. But I get your point.
If other parts are depends on other parts, they're not parts. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I understand what you're saying.
That's the concept of
Okay, thank you.
You understand where I'm coming from?
I do. I understand because I've been working with you. So I understand what you're saying, but that's a whole different conversation. So we explore that in a separate thing, that whole system thinking idea. But absolutely, I see what you're saying, but we'll talk about it separately.
So this, I think, relates to your conversation. As put it this way, there's a lot of information coming down from, all of these quadralities and this fourfoldness. But so for me, it's like being present with that, and then not making a big deal out of absorbing it all, but just, taking this in. So one of the things that, again, because I'm such a conceptual person, so I was thinking about magnification and, zooming in and zooming out. And you could say with a particular lens. I mean, Natty, you're saying, things are one, and you're saying you're looking at it from a fourfoldness, but looking at it large and small, viewing it through that concept of magnification makes it easier for me to go from that omnipotent state down to the pea shell, so that you can kind of, because there is, I think, there's something of value in being able to transition from those different levels and yet contain them. It's like you're talking about the space-time, energy, gravity being the container, and yet within there's all these. Anyway, that's what helped me go through, because that's a lot of information. That's a lot of contemplation right there.
Cool, thanks. So I'm going to bring this recorded part to an end, and then we can just talk informally. Okay, so thank you both for participating. I think it's a really, some really, really great points that came up. So with that, let's end this.